Hello everyone, welcome to Teacher Development Webinars. My name is Zamanullah Sand. I facilitate virtual programs at Teacher Development Webinars. Teacher Development Webinars is a social action project implemented by us to support teachers and educators around the world with professional development opportunities. Sorry for the technical glitch. It is an initiative using the rise in online professional development to connect people from around the world with opportunities which they may not have had due to old normal of face-to-face conferences. And in today's webinar, teaching reading in an online world, how to get them to read at a distance, will examine the rationale for concentrating on reading practice in distant learning. We'll look into methods that will work with your students to enhance their learning, introduce a useful size for reading materials along with tips to make them work effectively, discuss approaches to evaluation. Yeah, and now it's my pleasure and privilege to introduce Dr. Thomas Robb for this session. Dr. Thomas Robb, PhD, University of Hawaii, the Professor Emeritus, Kyoto Sangyo University, where he was chair of the English department. He's a long-time user of CALL and the internet and has created a number of websites and applications for extensive reading, student projects, interactive learning, and professional exchange. He was instrumental in developing some of functions useful for language learning, such as the quiz import function and the item analysis function in Moodle. One site for extensive reading, mreader.org, has over 1 lakh students and users in more than 40 countries. He has been president of JALD, served on the board of directors of International TESOL, and is the past president of PACCAL. He has been chair of TESOL EFL interest section, chair of the CAL interest section, and now is the chair of the new reading vocabulary interest section, and he was instrumental in founding it. He's also chair of Extensive Reading Foundation, the editor of TESL English Journal, the first online journal of ELT, and the founder of the annual GoCall conference and a member of the organizing committee of World Call. What a wonderful profile, Dr. Tom. Welcome to Teacher Development Webinars. It's an honor to have you here today.
Thank you very much for that long introduction. Now I hardly have any time left to speak. I should have made it a little shorter. Thank you everyone for coming. And I hope what I have to say will be useful for you. Let me share my screen, if I can find the correct one. Oh dear, I have so many windows here. This one. Okay, so teaching reading in an online world, how to get them to read at a distance. And getting students to read is always a problem. And so I have some suggestions for it. And I'm not going to be talking about all kinds of reading. What you do in the classroom when you're teaching reading is probably rather different from what I am going to be talking about. So there are two basic kinds of reading, intensive study and extensive learning. And probably you've been doing mostly intensive reading, where the students have to do careful word by word study, and the object is to understand the meaning of the words and the grammar of the sentences. But extensive reading, the object is to understand the meaning of the text. And actually, if you try to understand every word, you forget what the meaning of the paragraph is, okay? So you're trying to understand the meaning of the text. And so if there are unknown words or confusing grammar, you just ignore it and you push on. It's not necessary to understand everything. The important thing is to understand the story and hopefully to enjoy what you're reading. So why is extensive reading essential? And I'm saying this, it is essential, even though we haven't been doing it. And it's one of the reasons why so many of our students never become proficient in English. Okay, so there are 4 skills we all know: reading, writing, speaking, and listening. But the definition of a skill is an ability to do an activity or a job well, especially because you have practiced it. So here, these people are practicing, kids or professionals, and without the practice, they would never become good at what they're doing. So how can we expect our students to become good at what we want them to do if we don't give them the time to practice? So there's knowledge, and this is what you're doing in the class. You're giving them knowledge. It's the intensive reading, or for any other skill, you're giving them the knowledge. But what they really need is to practice the skill. And language is like a sport. Practice makes perfect. You can't become good at football by reading a book. You can't become good at using a language without practice. But of course, there is no time in class to practice. There's too much in the syllabus. The textbook is full of new words and new grammar. So how can you stop and give them a lot of time to practice it when you have so much to cover in the syllabus, and the ministry wants them to know it all for that final examination? So there just isn't enough time to cover all that we are supposed to teach, that the principal of the school expects you to teach. But only practice will give the students the skill that they need to use English. And this is why I am saying extensive reading is the best way to gain that skill, because actually the extensive reading can be done outside the classroom, so it doesn't have to interfere with what you are doing inside the classroom so much. But of course, you have to be sure that they are really reading if it's outside the classroom, because you aren't there to watch them. Okay, so here are the basic principles of extensive reading. I'm sorry, I forgot to turn off the sound in this PowerPoint. Just listen to me. Can you hear it?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so just listen to the recording then.
Dr. Tom, we
Yes.
can't hear the recording.
You cannot hear it. Okay, so
okay.
Okay, so I took this slide from one that I prepared for a recorded presentation that students in my MOOC would watch, and so that's why. But anyway, you can see the main points are that extensive reading means a lot. So it has to be easy, they have to read quickly, and they have to, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. And there can be little dictionary use because it slows them down so they can read quickly. And if you want them to enjoy what they're reading, the students have to be able to choose what they are reading, and there has to be a variety of material. But of course, extensive reading is not everything. You also need the in-class intensive reading. But what happens if all the material is too difficult, or the students are slow readers, or there are too many difficult words? Those are problems with this orthodox approach. What if they have to read books that they don't like because you chose them, right? So because very often the teacher is choosing what they are reading. So this is not ideal, but it happens. And what if you don't have a large variety of material? Well, I hope I can answer some of these questions today, because I'll be showing you a lot of websites where you can get a variety of material, or where your students can find a variety of material. So are they getting enough practice? Now, this is about Japan. How many words are there in 3 years of in a junior high school English textbook? Sorry, it's something, I didn't even hit anything. How many words are there, do you think? Can you, in the chat box, put your guess? This is all 3 years, the total. How many words are there in the textbook for all 3 years for reading?
Bara says 20,000. Byron says 30,000. Rita says 25.
Okay, thank
25,000.
you. Let's see what happens. Only 5,000 words. So in 3 years in Japan, they only read 5,000 words in the textbook. So they aren't getting any practice. Now let's try senior high school. Which do you think it is? Okay, I've given you time to think. $20,000 words. So in 6 years of English study in Japan, in middle school and high school, they are reading a total of 25,000 words. My students at my university, which I'm retired from now, they read 150,000 words in their first year in extensive reading, plus, of course, words in their other subjects because they're English majors. So it's very little. And you will see at the very end of this presentation, I have a challenge for you with a prize. And that is, I'd like to find out from your country, from the government approved or mandated textbooks, how many words there are for the middle school or senior high school textbooks. I'd like you to actually count them and report them. And there's a prize for the first 12 people who report from 12 different countries. Okay, so why do we teach English? Why does the government want our students to study English? Is the ultimate aim to pass an examination? That's what a lot of people seem to think. Or to be able to use English in their daily life and work. We tend to lose the focus on what the actual purpose is, because that examination is very important. And the parents want their students to get high marks. So there's this conundrum. Which is it that we should be doing? Okay, so there's study and learning. So this repeats sort of what I said before. Study, learning facts, new words, practicing examples that might be on the test, but it's usually teacher-led. There's little learner autonomy. I'm sure you're familiar with this term, right? The student decides what to read and when to read. But in practice, actually, what the students are getting 95% of the time is not practice. They are just studying very minutely, word by word, and so forth. The teachers very often cannot give the students time to practice. So learning is being able to use the language in practical situations for any of the 4 skills. But today, of course, we're focusing on reading. Listening actually is also a receptive skill, but it's much harder to get students to do that. Very often at my school, if you try to get them to listen to something, they'll find the text and read it instead because their listening ability is lower than their reading ability. So learning equals practice. Okay, now this I'm only going to touch on lightly because next week you'll be introduced to it in more detail. This is Paul Nation from the University of Victoria in Wellington. And he says there are 4 different activities that should be about 25%. And notice number 1 and number 2 are meaning focused, input, output. Input means listening and reading, output means speaking and writing. And then number 4 is fluency development. Things that you already know very well, you have to become more and more fluent at them. And number 3, language-focused learning is what you have traditionally been doing. And he says these learning activities should be about 25% each. But as I said earlier, it turns out the number 3 is about 95% in many situations. So In extensive reading, students read a lot of easy, interesting material. It gives the students practice. They see the same words and grammar over and over that they have studied in class. I'm actually studying Indonesian right now, and I just took a word list of 165 words and tried to memorize them. And I kept forgetting the same word. Every time the flashcard came back with the same question, I again had forgotten what it was. But then I went on the internet, and in Google Translate, I took an Indonesian text and the English translation for it, and I could see those same words that I had studied, and made the words much more meaningful and easier to remember when I went back to the flashcard. So the reading really does reinforce the words that you know and the grammar that you know. A learner really needs to see each new word 8 to 12 times in order to be able to use it. That's 8 to 12 times when reading for meaning. And then they'll slowly comprehend how that word is really used. And textbooks cannot do that. There's too much new material. So there is this principle of recycling material that you have in a textbook, but in practice, it means mentioning the word or the grammar 1 or 2 more times, and that just isn't enough. So how can students do this? Students must read lots of books that are enjoyable, so that they want to read more, easy to read so that they don't need a dictionary. Graded readers are one way to do this, but graded readers are usually physical textbooks. So if your students are online, they can't go to the library and borrow a graded reader, even if your school library happens to have them. So these are some graded readers. There are maybe 4,000 or 5,000 graded readers available. They're a little expensive though, and they aren't available in many countries. So they maybe are not an alternative for you. So that's why the online alternatives that I'm going to explain are hopefully useful for your students. Now, you may wonder, well, does extensive reading work? If they are doing a lot of reading, does it improve their English ability? Yes, it improves the reading, but also their understanding, their vocabulary, their listening even, and their test scores. It's not immediate. You can't read a book and then expect to have higher test scores. But over the long run, if they are doing extensive reading for 6 months or 12 months, they will have they will get greater test scores. And I have proof of that. So here is a very quick example from a thesis by Natsuki Aka. And she was fortunate that she could do an experiment with 405 students. Actually, the traditional group was 1 year, the standard curriculum. So they had 90 hours during the year of reading, 60 hours of just studying grammar and vocabulary, and 30 hours of listening. But the next year, instead of doing the grammar for 60 hours, they did extensive reading. They just sat in the classroom for 60 hours reading books that were easy for them to read. All of the students took the same pre-test and the post-test, one post-test on grammar and vocabulary, another one on reading comprehension. And here are the results. So at the beginning, for grammar and vocabulary, the experimental group was a little higher in their test score. But now look at the end of the year. The experimental group was much higher in the control group. And the control group, remember, had studied grammar and vocabulary. Their score went down. And then reading, the control group and the experimental group were almost the same. But at the end of the year, this was the difference in their scores on the very same examination. So this is just one of many, many studies that show that extensive reading actually does work and just doesn't make students be able to read better. It makes them understand English better, or whatever language it is that they are studying. So if students are online, how can they have access to graded readers? Well, there are some graded readers online, In fact, line 3 there, freegradedreaders.com is a site I've made, which has some free graded readers that you can either download or some are flip books. You have to be online to read them. There's xreading.com, which has over 1,000 online graded readers with short quizzes, but it costs a little per student. But for people in lower economic regions, it's only something like maybe $9–10 a year per student. So it's not so expensive, but it does cost something. There are other sites with graded reading for native speakers. It's not graded for our students though, because native speaking children, for example, know a lot of slang and idioms that our students don't know. But try not to use authentic material that's intended for proficient reading, like news. It's too difficult for students to read quickly and fluently. It becomes, or is, intensive reading, not extensive reading. So how do you get them to read, which is the topic of this? Well, first, offer them material that's at their level or lower than their current reading level. That means that it's possible for them to read quickly with understanding. It should be interesting. They should be able to select from a variety of topics. So from the material I'll be presenting, you'll see that they can choose something which is interesting to them. Of course, you need to require them to do a specific amount of reading because many students would prefer not to read, right? They have many other things that they enjoy doing. And so if it's not required, then many students will not do it. So you have to have some way to check. So you need to devise some means of tracking how much they have read, some record keeping, self-reports, quick 50-word summaries, etc. In the introduction, there was mreader.org, which is a site that I made that has quizzes for 8,000 graded readers and other books, which can be used for checking, but it's only for entire books, not for websites. And of course, you need to motivate them to read. You can have competitions, have them share their reading experiences. They can go into breakout rooms and talk about what they've read and the difficulties they had with it and why they thought it was good. But you need to actually talk it up and show that it's interesting, that you enjoy reading too. So now we're coming to some good sites with online reading material. So I've already mentioned this, freegradedreaders.com. You'll notice at the bottom here, this is the top page, the 5-finger rule. When students are trying to decide if some material is useful for them, if it's a book, we say to use the 5-finger rule. So they turn to a random page and they count. Oh, I don't know that word. I don't know that word. I don't know that word. I don't know. Oops, 4. No, this book is too difficult for me. So if it's 2 or 3, that means that probably it's readable. Of course, if it's not a book, if it's a long text, then you have to do the same thing, but just choose 2 paragraphs here and 2 paragraphs there. And so they can see generally if it's understandable or not. So here is the page for A1 level readers. This one was actually donated by Paul Nation. It was one that he had written with Jerry Meister early in his career, and it didn't have copyright, so he gave it to me. So most of the books on here are ones that an editor or an author of books 30, 40 years ago wrote, which are out of copyright. So anyway, you're welcome to access the site. There are some advertisements on it in order to generate some income to support the site, but hey, what do you want for free? Okay, now here is the Voice of America and the BBC sites. And some of you probably already know about these sites, so I'll just introduce some of the reading activities there that I find useful. Now, here is the Voice of America, and they have videos on many different topics, and the videos do have a transcript, so they can read it, they can watch the video and then read it, they can read it, then watch the video, they can listen to it. There are many different ways that they can use it. This is the intermediate level, but you can see at the top, there's also a beginning level and an advanced level. And the video there is an archive of all their videos. So there is a lot there that is available. Okay. So here's an example of one, and you can see that it is pretty easy. It has in boldface here, the word that is difficult to understand. And here is what the archive looks like. And each of these here does have the transcript. And you can see here, there's an audio menu of things you can listen to. So American stories, classic short stories that introduce American literature to intermediate in English literature. Sorry, this is all American because this is Voice of America, but we get the BBC and it's all about England. That's fine. Either one, it really doesn't make a bit of difference which language, or you can study both of them. They're essentially the same. Okay, so here is what part of one story looks like, the text. Okay, and here, if the students don't know what level they are, there is a test here for them to take. And I can't remember if this is, this is on the BBC site. We're getting into the BBC site here, but actually it isn't so necessary for your students to know what level they are. If they do the 5-finger rule and decide that this is readable, that's fine. If they are using graded readers, they can choose from a level, because the publishers make the books in usually 5 or 6 or 7 different levels. So they choose a lower level, they read through some of them at the low level, and if they are happy with how much they've understood, then they can go up to the next level and so on until they get to the highest level. So this is what the this offers you the content for a specific level after you know what level you are. But most students, I think, have a general idea if they are A1, A2, B1, and so forth. So it's a very rough leveling system. There are only the 6 levels here, okay? And then under each, it shows the speaking, the listening, and the reading that is available. And you can click on that to go. And then there are topics you can also select from. So this here is a Learning English Kids site. And I don't know about your students, but the students in Japan don't seem to care too much about the target audience for what they're reading, as long as they find it interesting to read. And so there's a preparation material like this, scaffolding for the readings. And then there's a fact file like this. This is about bullying, which I think is a problem in almost every country in the world. So this not only is a reading text, it also is teaching them some useful cultural material, how to not bully. And here's a train schedule. So there's a lot of useful material that is not standard stories, reading passages. Now, there are some problems with online sites. I have more online sites coming, but one problem with many of them is there's no student registration or tracking, which means it's up to you to devise some way to check that the students have actually read the material. Sometimes they say it's free, but when you go to the site, you find, oh, they do have a couple things that are free. But if you want to use the rest of the material, you have to join and perhaps pay some money. And sometimes it's free for online access, but you can't print it to make copies if you want to distribute it to the students. And often the material is targeted to native speaking children. So it has vocabulary, idioms, and cultural references that our students would not understand. And sometimes it's old or out of copyright material. For example, the Gutenberg.org is a site that has a huge archive, maybe over 100,000 texts in English, literature, as well as public documents and so forth. But they're mostly old, and they're difficult even for me to understand sometimes. Now, here is one called eslfast.com, and this material is good, but it's good, it's simple, but it has a very strong American cultural background because it was originally developed by the Foreign Service in the United States for Voice of America and their other English activities. But it's now free, and one teacher, Rongwon Chang, sorry, what happened? Okay, has put them all online, and you can see there are advertisements again, but actually these advertisements, the income from these goes to scholarships for teachers. So it actually is good to have your students access the site and read these. So here's another one. All right. And here's one, children's storybooks online, which this is also for native speakers, but I find that some of the stories are interesting. Here's the story of the Little Gingerbread Man, and it's in rather simple English, although our students might not know what caramel means, frosting, sometimes it's called icing. So anyway, but these are available, and it's well illustrated. So here are some more resources. These are resources for you as a teacher rather than material for the students. But you can see here, the free reading material is here. Books on extensive reading, evidence that works. If you aren't happy with the one illustration that I showed you from Natsumi Aka, there are more citations here with more information. You can see there's awards that we give, there's graded readers, and we have World Congresses every 2 years. And this year, you can see at the bottom, extensive reading around the world. This is from 13 to 15 of August, and you are welcome to join. There's a $5 fee for joining, except, well, the richer countries, the fee is now $30. It's after the deadline for the lowest rate. Otherwise, it's $5. But if there's someone who cannot send the $5 because they don't have access to a credit card or whatever, we can grant a scholarship. So anyone is welcome to join. So, and we also have guides like this for extensive reading, and we have these in many different languages. And if your language is not here, then perhaps you and some of your colleagues might be interested in translating the English version into your own language. For European languages, however, the teachers are so proficient in English already that they really don't need a guide in their native language because they are quite comfortable with the English version. But anyway, something for you to consider. And this is all at erfoundation.org. Now, this is the mReader site that I mentioned to you, but these are all graded readers. That you can see at the top a sample of them. And what you see below is the leaderboard. It shows who has read the most at each of the 10 levels. And this is updated every week. And you can see in the past 2 years, one woman, Saki Asano, has read over 3.4 million words. Obviously, she likes to read. And this is what a student's personal page looks like. It's gamified, as I said. There's a cover of the book. Every time they pass a quiz, they get the cover of the book. There are levels. So this student's at level 5. And after the student has read, let's say there are 5 green blocks, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12. So when the student has read 12 books at level 5, the student will be promoted to level 6. So it's like a game in that sense. And there's also a target. So the target was 36,000 words, and this student is already over the target with 37,000 words for the current term. So this is mReader, and this is the teacher's page for it. So the teacher can at a glance see everything that the students have done. And this is X Reading, which I'll just mention quickly. This is the one that I mentioned, which costs a little money, but you can see the main benefits there. All books are always available. Quizzes are available for every book. Audio on demand for almost every book. That means that the students can actually listen to the story rather than read it. The text is blurred out, so they see the page with the picture, but they can't read the words. And there are recommendations from other students, and you can actually use this with with the physical books in your library, and they take the mReader quizzes. And so it tracks their progress for including the books, how many words they've read, how long they've taken, and what the reading speed is. So it's quite valuable. And so I recommend it to you if you can find the funds. And this is actually what I'm going to be giving as a prize for the challenge that I'm offering you at the end of this talk. 12 people will get a subscription to this for themselves for 1 year. Now, if you need to keep track of things, here is one thing that you can do. There's a URL for this at the end. Well, you can see the URL there, tinyurl.com/Google-reading-record. And that brings up this sheet here. And from this sheet, all you do is you put the students' names in column A, and then you click Create Sheets. And then it gives you something like this, with the students' names along the side, and along the bottom, a separate tab for each student. So each student then can enter the name of the book and how many words approximately it had, and a comment. So this is free to use. You just need access to Google. And just one thing, if you have to log in, you have to have a Google account, and then you access the site. But when you copy it, it will warn you that you're doing something dangerous, because there's special code in the background of this, which you will be copying from the master site onto your own site. So anyway, you just have to say, okay, the code is perfectly safe, but Google doesn't know that. So there is a warning. So this, I hope, will be useful for you for tracking. Of course, the students have to be honest and put down what they have actually done, but it helps you keep track of what all the students in your class are doing. Now, we're almost at the end here. Here are the various sites. The British Council, there are 3 sites. Learning English Kids, Learning English Teens, and Learning English, the one for adults. And there's the Voice of America site, and then ESL Fast is, it's a cover site for the one that I showed you with the easy American material. And it does have material at several different levels. And Magic Keys is for native speakers, and it has some books that are readable on the site. Then I mentioned to you the Extensive Reading Foundation and freegradedreaders.com, which is also an Extensive Reading Foundation site, and then X Reading. And now at the bottom, for kids, these are for kids. Actually, the last one there, Asia Foundation Let's Read, is not so useful. I couldn't find the material on the site. All I found is information about the organization itself. But the top two are very useful, have lots of stories, thousands of stories, and some of them you can choose different languages. So the students can read the story in, say, Urdu, and then after they've read it in Urdu, then they can read it in English. So I recommend that you give these to your students, although these are for kids. So if your students don't like kiddie stuff, then they might not like those sites too much, but the material is good. And the Extensive Reading Foundation has a Facebook page, and there's a Google spreadsheet that I showed you already, an MReader I mentioned, but many people think that because it's called MReader, there are actually books to read. There aren't. It's only quizzes on the books which they have read from their own personal library. And the Watkins reference here is a good summary of how to implement extensive reading, assuming that you are willing to spend the effort to get your students to read. Okay, and here is the bonus that I was talking about earlier. Help Tom by counting the number of words in the official ministry-approved textbooks for your country. Pick a popular series that covers all levels if there is more than one. All levels meaning 3 years of middle school or 3 years of secondary school, or maybe that's a Japanese system, but perhaps you have a different number of years at each level. But anyway, the books for each level for secondary school at least, and then count the number of words in the reading text, not the grammar examples or the word list, just the passages that they are expected to read and comprehend. Of course, you don't have to use your finger and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, you can estimate by the number of words per line and the average number of lines on a page about how many words there are in the book at each level. And then report the information to me. And then you can win a year subscription to xreading.com. And so I look forward to receiving information for you. I'll keep this open until I get 12 different countries with useful information, okay? It has to be accurate, but then you'll get this year's subscription. I've cleared this with the president of xreading.com, and so it will happen. Okay, so the first 12 teachers who provide satisfactory information will win. And I also need to mention, you can see it at the bottom of every single page, the extensive reading MOOC. And here it explains what extensive reading is, how to implement it in your class, the benefits of doing it, what materials can be used, and does it really work? I've touched quickly on all of these topics here, but this is a step-by-step module that takes 15 weeks with little video recordings, which you accidentally saw part of one on earlier there, where I was explaining the basic principles of extensive reading. So anyway, you're welcome to join this the next time it starts, which is 4th of October. There is a certificate for the people that join. Again, there's a charge, but if you cannot afford the small charge, I think it's $30 for, no, $20 for the advanced countries economically, and $10 for other countries. But again, we will give scholarships to people who cannot afford it. However, having said that, for the current session, we had 2 people who said, I can't afford it, but I would like to join. Those are the only 2 people who actually have not participated. Okay, so that's one reason why there is a small charge, besides helping to maintain the site. By investing a little of your own money in it, it means that the people who are in it are more motivated to pursue it to the end. So anyway, that's the same, I think, with almost anything in the world. Okay, the more self-investment there is, the more concerned people are. So thank you for listening to me. Here is my contact address, chair@erfoundation.org. You can Google me, Tom Robb. I have a Gmail address as well. And you can download this PowerPoint from this URL here, tinyurl/Rob-TD webinars, or use the QR code there for the same thing. And if you wait for about 15 minutes before downloading it, I'll try to remove the sound from that slide. So you'll have a more perfect PowerPoint to look at. And so, Amanullah, that's all I have to say. Thank you very much. And we have 10 minutes left for discussion.
Thank you so very much, Tom. I really appreciate your ideas. It's all an interesting session and a lot of a website and wonderful resources for teachers on extensive reading. So now the floor is open for questions. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box, and appreciate your time, Tom. So yeah, I have gathered some of the questions. Let me open them. Yep. So Selvan Yangi from Malaysia, she asked, do you think that reading aloud, where they can listen to themselves, help the readers understand better?
Reading aloud? Just a minute,
Yep.
I'm trying to type my address here. Okay, I put my email address in the chat box. So no, not really. Reading aloud can help fluency development to some extent, but if you are only reading and you haven't heard how the words are actually pronounced, you might be reading with the wrong pronunciation, wrong intonation, and so forth. It's a common practice for teachers who get somebody to stand up and read something, but that's really an intensive type of practice, not extensive. If you want them to get speaking practice, get them to write something very short, and then in small groups, have them say what they said without looking at what they wrote. Okay, so they prepare a little short presentation, 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and then they study it, and then with a small group, they share what they have said to each other, maybe showing pictures or slides or something. That's much better, I think, than just speaking out loud. Okay, Amanullah, please, what is the next one?
And the next question, yep. So Samina Khan from Karachi, Pakistan, she asked that apart from reading comprehension passages, how do we assess reading skills?
Yeah, okay, well, you're talking about reading skills. Now, extensive reading isn't about assessment. Normally what we do is it's part of a grade of another class, and they're basically graded only on the amount that they have read, not how well they have understood it, okay? So, so you're assessing how much they have cooperated with your request that they read. And that is not the only part of the assessment, because usually you're doing extensive reading as part of another course. So you say, your outside reading is going to be 20% of your final mark for this course. And then that 20% is based on how much they have read, depending on if they've reached the target that you have established. that's basically my answer to that.
That's great. Another question from Manama, Bahrain. Hamad Ali from Manama, Bahrain. He asked that, are there any free common creative resources that can be used in teaching different levels? I think you have mentioned a lot of them. And
yes, and if you go to extensive reading, erfoundation.org, you can find more materials that are mentioned there in the resource area. Okay, there is quite a bit more I could have introduced, but there wasn't enough time to do that. But anyway, there are lists available of materials on erfoundation.org. In fact, here is one that I didn't put on the list by, I'm sorry, that's wrong. It's ercentral.com. This site was developed by Rob Waring, who is also in Japan. It has a lot of free reading material of short passages. It does allow you to create a class so you can track what they have read. And it has listening material as well. So this is a good resource that you can access. I'm sorry that I didn't put that in. I'll put that in after this session closes, so it will be there if you download the PowerPoint.
sure. And Ms. Amber Nafis asked, how can we motivate kids to read, either online or through books?
Motivation is a very difficult point because, as I mentioned, most students don't want to read. If you enjoy reading and talk about reading a lot, that will help. But most students are not going to be motivated by an altruistic idea of reading is fun, okay? It's not part of the culture in many places in the world to read. You read for instrumental purposes because it's part of your work or part of your study, but for pleasure, you do other things. So you do need to require it, and you do need to have a way of tracking what they have done.
And by the way, do you prefer paper books or online materials?
A paper book on
Yep.
online materials, no.
Yep.
The online materials have online links, which you can get on the erfoundation.org site, but extensive reading is basically students choosing what they want to read independently, because it should be something that's interesting to them. And also their levels are different. So it has to be something which is at the appropriate level. So it can't be compiled into some sort of a textbook. You're muted.
Sorry, I was muted. So Syed Hamid from Vietnam, he asked that, can you introduce some reading games and engaging activities for online reading?
Reading games. No, I'm afraid I don't have any except my own mreader.org site, which is gamified, but it's not a game. Okay, there's a difference between them. But if you look on Google, I'm sure you can find some things. But again, the problem with games that you might find is they might not be at the appropriate level, and you do them one time and then you're bored. Okay, so it's hard to do games, although something like the site that I had, where you're building up a word count, or even if you use the Excel sheet, not Excel, the Google spreadsheet, and you have the students compete to get the most amount of words read, that is sort of a gamification technique that will get students to read more. Well, some of them, not all of them.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, if you have any other questions, you can put them in the chat. And meanwhile, I'm monitoring the chat. How do you create a website for your organization? This you can consult any website developer.
Fatma Ibrahim says, I think there's a new website to reinforce reading. It's called News English Bulletin. There is one called newsella.com. I think that's the right spelling, but you can search for it, which does offer news at several different levels of ability, which is also a site which could be used.
Great. So a similar kind of question from Rabia. She asks, how can we enhance the love of reading when everything is going digital?
I don't see that as a conflict. Okay, you can read digitally. You don't have to read paper books. You can read online as well. It depends. Many people, though, tend to prefer paper for pleasure reading, and then digital for work or study related. But I read all of my novels on a Kindle. So, and I enjoy doing it that way. I've read maybe 100 books on Kindle, and it doesn't cause me a problem, but that's a personal preference. Not everybody learns the same way, of course. There's one question here from
Paulus,
yes,
yes.
From Wen Lai Woon. I'm not sure where she might be from. How to tackle low proficiency students who couldn't read at all. That is a very complex topic, and that you can't do extensive reading if you don't have a fundamental basis. Okay, so to teach the recognition of the alphabet and so forth, you could use very simple books that are for children, lots of pictures that teach the alphabet. There's YouTubes that also teach the alphabet for kids, and some of these might help. Oh, you're from Malaysia. Okay. And then, does model reading help students? It might help with learning the sound of the language and the intonation of the language. However, if you are in Singapore or Malaysia or India, you're going to learn the local intonation of the language, not the standard American or British intonation, which is quite different, but it really isn't important. However, students need to be exposed to different models for speaking. So the teacher's model is not going to be just the only model that they need. They need to listen to material that is online.
Great. We have another question from Anna Rafia from Philippines, and she asks, what is the most effective teaching approach in distance learning, particularly for reading?
I think I just talked about that for 60 minutes. Okay, getting them to read as much as possible that they can understand. Okay, it has to be low level material that is interesting for them. Okay, that is most effective. There's no other way. As I said at the very beginning, they need to practice and practice and practice. Okay, one problem we have is that for us, meaning all the people who are listening, you are proficient in English, even though it's not your native language, probably. And how did you get that way? Because you practice a lot. Why? Because you liked English. Now, that's not the problem. That is the problem with our students. They don't like English, most of them, okay? If they like English, they are going to learn even without us. There's lots of resources available. So the question is, how can we get the students who don't like English to do the reading and get the practice that they need?
And one of the misconceptions I see in our students is, that when we talk in English, we must accent like native speakers. So this research suggests is completely myth. We can talk in Pakistani accent, Indian accent, Singaporean accent. So all these Englishes are, if understood and comprehensive, they are good enough, and we are good to go.
Yeah, I agree. However, that's fine if you are speaking to people in your region. Now, if you are traveling to England and you cannot adjust your intonation to what the local people speak, then they will not be able to comprehend you. Okay, so you have to sort of meet them halfway. I can remember my own mother. We went to buy some ice cream at a mall one time, and the worker was from Thailand. My mother couldn't understand what she was saying. What? No, can you say that again? Then she said, "Oh, I can't understand you," and she walked away. Okay, they have very low tolerance, many people, for accents that they don't understand. So we have to try to accommodate that by speaking the way our audience expects us to speak.
Great. So thanks very much for your presence, everyone. We appreciate your presence. I was telling Tom that we have such a diverse audience. So yeah, people from Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, Pakistan, of course, India. And if you could type your name, where are you from? So he could also, identify. And yeah, so for the certificate for this session, if you want a certificate of participation, and there is reasonable fees 300 for Pakistan nationals and $5 for internationals. You can email us at info.tdwebinars@gmail.com for the payment details. But yeah, this session and our webinars are completely free. For our upcoming webinars, future webinars, you can find the details on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook group, and of course, this recording is available on Feature Development Webinars YouTube channel. So if you want to share it with your colleagues, you are free to do that. Thank you so very much, Tom. We appreciate your insights and the huge experience you have in extensive reading. Thanks very much for sharing all these wonderful resources. Appreciate that.
You're quite welcome. I hope to be able to do it again with new material sometime in the future. So, thank you. Goodbye.
That's great. We'd love to host you again. Let me also remind you that COVID-19's third wave, this is not over yet. So please be responsible for your life and your loved ones' lives. And yeah, take care. And I'll be signing off. Bye-bye, everyone.